Objecting. The member for Barton has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer update the House on how the latest national accounts provide further evidence of the growing strength of the Australian economy and how we are transitioning to a more diversified economy? How is the sound economic management of the government promoting further jobs and growth in our economy?
And I call the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for Barton for his question? Can I also thank him for his tremendous service to this parliament as the member for Barton? Mr Speaker, today's December quarter national accounts demonstrate once again that Australia is making the successful transition of its economy from the investment phase of the mining boom to a more broader-based economy. This is happening. It shows that our economy is growing. It grew at 3% last year through the year, Mr Speaker, and 0.6% for the December quarter, exceeding expectations at that, Mr Speaker, which were far less. Mr Speaker, this has been through particularly the strength of domestic household consumption, backed up by the increased confidence that we've seen out there amongst consumers, particularly over the last 6 months, Mr Speaker, the dwelling investment improvement of some 12.1%, the vast majority of which in this last quarter has been in the apartment market, Mr Speaker, which we know is more predominant amongst investors, particularly negative gearing investors, Mr Speaker. Rural exports, Mr Speaker, up 13% over the course of this past year, Mr Speaker, and service exports doing very strongly at 8% growth, as I reported to the House yesterday. Of course, this will all be further encouraged and supported in the years going forward on our service exports and our other more general export performance by the trade agreements which have been completed by this government. More than 300,000 jobs last year, Mr Speaker, generated, and we see why, Mr Speaker, because the economy is successfully transitioning. It's growing faster than the G7, it's growing faster than the OECD, and with resource-based economies like Canada, it's growing at twice the rate, and at 3% we're matching it with economies like South Korea, Mr Speaker. We are working together as a country to ensure that we successfully transition our economy, and we're doing it as a nation, Mr Speaker, and it is the biggest challenge facing our nation and our national economy to ensure that we continue to manage this transition well. And what that requires in its next phase, Mr Speaker, is to continue to encourage investment. And you don't do that by putting big taxes on investment, Mr Speaker, like those opposite plan to do. What you do is what's happening in the last budget, Mr Speaker, where we increased the tax advantages, particularly for small businesses, and the instant asset write-off and those measures, Mr Speaker. And as we go forward to ensure that we continue wherever possible to do the right thing by businesses. In the innovation statement, Mr Speaker, we produced new tax concessions and capital gains tax exemptions for new start-ups, Mr Speaker, because to get through this next phase we are going to need the productivity growth that comes from innovation. But I tell you what you also don't do, Mr Speaker. If you want to ensure that we continue to successfully manage this transition, you don't tax and spend like those opposite do, Mr Speaker. You don't tax and spend like those opposite want to do, Mr Speaker, because that's not a plan for jobs and growth. It's not a plan to transition the economy, Mr Speaker. This is the biggest challenge facing this economy, and their tax expense approach.
Treasurer.